And Jan Crawford is with us from the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. So, Jan, what are your sources telling you about the potential for the nominee? Is there any indication who the president might be considering?
Oh, I mean, I think the president kind of gave us some of the best clues in that news conference that he had yesterday when he kind of suggested, look to the people that he's nominated for these kind of positions in the past. And that will kind of give you some sense of what he's thinking for this next nomination. And of course, his previous nominations to the Supreme Court, Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Justice Elena Kagan, I mean, they have several things in common. There's a pattern. They both brought diversity to the court. They both had sterling resumes and qualifications. And they both are solidly liberal. I mean, the president yesterday, a reporter asked, it sounds like you may be wanting to appoint a moderate. And the president immediately was like, no, I don't know where you got that. So I think if you think about that and what he said is he's looking for someone along those lines. And one of the, I think, widely considered prospective nominees is a judge here on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the Federal Appeals Court, Sri Srinivasan. He would bring diversity, he would have a sterling resume, and he would be kind of that solidly liberal nominee who has a lot of respect from Republicans, but nonetheless is still solidly liberal. I think we got some clues yesterday. The president is not thinking about really going out of the box with this kind of nomination, doing something kind of crazy just to fire up the base. It sounds like he's going to kind of stick to his pattern.
Jan, for those of us who are not lawyers but who understand and think about the Constitution, as many on the campaign trail have said, which is it is meant to be interpreted the way that it was written. If you go with that argument, is the president right that it's his constitutional responsibility to nominate somebody to the Supreme Court, and it is the Senate's responsibility to take up that nomination?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, he's right that the Senate, the Constitution does say that it is his responsibility to make a nomination to the Supreme Court. But the Constitution then just says that that will be with the advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate's role, under the words of the Constitution, is to give the president advice and then consent of the Senate. So here they're saying, well, we're not, that's our role and we don't have to consent. So it's not quite right for the president to say they're obligated under the Constitution to have a hearing. That's not in the Constitution, and Republicans are certainly, not willing to read words into the Constitution. That is at odds with conservative legal theory, as you know. So, it's kind of yes and no answer on that one.
Yeah, got it.
So now we're going to dive into the realm of probably tabloid or, I don't know, the Twilight Zone. But, there have been some conspiracy theories surrounding Justice Scalia's death, partially thanks to Donald Trump's recent comments. Are any of these theories really being taken seriously, Jan?
No. No, I mean,
short and sweet.
Obviously, when Scalia's death came as a shock to everyone. No one had really been talking about whether he had health problems. If you think about it, everyone kind of really focused on, if you thought about health issues on the court, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a cancer survivor, and she was always assuring everyone that she was fine and her health problems were resolved and she had no plans to retire. So the news of his death really kind of just sent shockwaves. And then, there was no autopsy. And then we found out he was pronounced dead by a judge, who just talked to the people there at the scene over the phone. So, that kind of started raising questions in some people's minds. But what really was the kicker was when the ranch owner said to a newspaper in Texas that he had discovered Scalia's body with a pillow over his head. So, that kind of just set the conspiracy theorists, on fire. Now, CBS actually talked to the ranch owner, and he said, well, listen, when I said a pillow over his head, I didn't mean over his face. I meant like it was over the headboard. And then the judge who said, I was entitled to do this under state law. The family didn't want an autopsy, and his physician told me he had a history of these chronic health problems. So, all the facts are that, of course, there's no signs of foul play. This was a man who was a month shy of his 80th birthday. He was a drinker. He was a smoker. He was overweight. And we find out now, that he had these kind of chronic health problems. So none of that is surprising. And frankly, I don't find it that surprising that the family in this situation would not want an autopsy. But all of this is fueling the speculation that, was there some kind of foul play?
All right, Jan Crawford, outside the Supreme Court. Thanks a lot, Jan.
You're welcome.